Learning in progress. Okay, so we're going to go over the challenges that you guys all responded to. And what I was saying was that everyone is feeling the same way. Like nobody's alone. No one had like a weird answer where I was like, that's kind of a weird one. Multiple people had the same answer. So getting clients was the big one. Everyone has that one always. And that's a pretty consistent challenge probably in all of your real estate career. Like the more experience you get, you might like understand how it works better. But at the beginning, that's just the hardest part, right? And then tied to that is just having confidence, like having confidence when you're actually with clients because you're new and you don't know exactly what you're saying and doing. That was a challenge. And then also just confidence and knowledge of the contracts was another one. And that's just going to take two things. It's going to take like studying and applying yourself and coming to classes and learning. And then it's going to also just take experience and actually doing, right? You're going to learn the contract better when you're having to like figure out how a certain provision works, like in a deal. So that's just going to take some time. Social media content, like what to post when you don't have your own deals going on, like what can you be doing, which I thought was, several people said that. A few people mentioned like mindset or not getting beat down, or if you get not great feedback, like how do I stay positive? Becoming an area expert. I love that. That's a challenge that's easy to do, right? That just takes time and application. How to make your buyer's offer more likely to get accepted. That was a couple people mentioned that one. And then finding inventory, of course. And I listened to a speech. This was an interesting just nugget. I listened to a Larry Kendall. I don't know if you guys get his like weekly emails, but he did like a 20-minute interview with Peter from Ninja. And he was saying, it's not that there's no inventory. So when people ask you, don't say that there's no inventory. He's like, because the home sale numbers are huge, like homes are selling. It's just, there's no standing inventory. Everything's moving really fast. So there is inventory out there. You just got to be out there fighting to get in front of it ASAP because nothing's sitting for a long time. I thought that was like an important distinction. Mm-hmm. Just to say no, there's no inventory is hopeless. It's just moves very quickly. There are deals out there happening. It's not like the market's down. So then skills that would help. The number one that you guys mentioned in some form or fashion was really like how to manage your time and how to structure your day, especially when you're not so busy yet that, you know, you kind of, the day kind of organizes itself. But when you have kind of, what should I be doing right now? How do I manage my day? So I thought that was interesting. Learning the forms better, which is, like I said, just going to take education and experience. Building and using a CRM, which was a good one. I love that you guys' mind is on that. And we have lots of classes for that. And then, you know, confidence came up there again. And so then the last one, which is something we can kind of like immediately put into place, is what are forms that we can cover that would help you guys, just so that I'm not randomly picking something. So today we're going to go over the listing agreement because a couple of you guys said that. But then a couple of you asked about IABS and buyer's rep form. So I think that's a great one we'll do. And I might have an experienced agent come and explain how they talk through those, just because I know it's always an awkward, like, how do I have this conversation now and get this person to sign this, right? But you need to present it and you need to have that conversation, and you're protecting yourself when you get that buyer's rep form signed, right? And then, you know, still knowing the 1 to 4, one of you was like, please continue to cover that one because it's the most important one, which is true. And then, you know, all the addendums that are so popular right now, financing, backups, appraisals. So I appreciate you guys. Does anyone have any thoughts, like hearing this, seeing this?
Well, the buyer's rep form.
Speak up so that they can hear you. No, don't unmute because it'll make an echo. You have to speak into my.
The buyer's rep form, I mean, you know, you can actually just have it for 1 day.
Yeah, that's true. She said you can, if you want to get a buyer's rep and you're only going to show them for a day, you don't have to make it like a super long term. Like if they're afraid of, if they're afraid of committing to it, you can always say like, look, we'll just make it for today or what have you. And then you're protected for those homes. And really what you're protecting yourself against is not so much the buyer, although, I mean, it would be if the buyer kind of went around you, it's the other brokers, right? So if you're working with a buyer and they go and see a house at an open house and fall in love with it, if they write an offer with that broker and you've been working with them for a while, if you show that broker, like, I have a buyer's rep, you're at least going to get a referral fee. So you're really protecting yourself. It gives us an arrow in our quiver when another broker like steps in with our client. So that's the point of that document. But any other questions or comments about this? This is going to help me a lot. So thank you guys for taking the time to give me this information. And you can always send me this information so I know how to point us in the right direction. But what we're going to do today is just go through the listing agreement. So any questions before we get going? All right. So, okay. So we got a new listing agreement last year, a new version, because of Clear Cooperation. They changed some of the terms. So we're just going to walk through this, and I'm going to walk through like what's in each provision, but then also, and I'm going to do the quick and dirty because this is a long document. It's 11 pages, but also like what you should be mindful of when you're sitting down and walking through this with the seller. And some people sit down and like bring the paper and walk through it with their seller. And some people just send it to the seller and say, let me know if you have questions, right? And some sellers are going to read it and have questions and want to mark it up, the attorneys usually. And some people are just going to sign it and send it back to you, right? Catherine, is that what you found in the listings that you've had?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Zareen, I'm looking at this. The one that I printed,
Huh?
at the top says 2021. And this one on the screen says 2020, but is it the same? And mine is only 10 pages.
Oh, let me pull, well, I mean, I went into Zip Forms yesterday and pulled the new one.
Okay. And I printed mine from WeChat or BF Engage.
Well, let's just double check because I mean, let's see. Let me share my screen so that you guys can just watch how I'm doing this. But I went into, let's see.
Mine's dated March 1st,
I
2021.
wonder if that's a rechat date or let's just go back. Let's just do it again then, just to be super safe. Although I did this yesterday. So all forms. Let me go to all. This is how I do my Zip forms. Some people use rechat. Some people, I'm going to look for the word listing. And it's going to pop up all of the forms that have that in there. So, I don't know, it's list. Exclusive right to list and sell. So, no, this is in Zip form. So if you work in rechat, don't worry about this. But here we go. Residential listing, exclusive right to sell. You're right. Must have grabbed the wrong one. Okay. Thank you, Catherine.
You bet.
Let's see. Okay. Okay, so let me download it so that it's bigger. So this is the old school way of doing it. Rechat is better because it's all in one place, but since I'm not doing deals, I'm not working in rechat necessarily. Okay, so let's look. Now you guys can see this. I'm gonna try to make it big. Share, new share. Okay, there we go. Okay, so let's see. So if you're sitting down with the seller, you know, who are the parties? The seller, you can put both of their names if they're married. If you don't know, then, or you're in a estate situation, I always say like, go ahead and get it signed with whoever you're working with, but immediately talk to the title company and let them tell you who the signatories need to be. Because it's one thing for us to get a listing agreement signed with, if it's an estate and we think one son is the executor, but there's actually two. The one son we're working with, that's fine for us. We just don't want to have them sign a contract with someone else because we can fix it if it's just with Briggs Freeman, right? We can get the other person to sign, but we don't want to execute a contract if we don't know that we have the proper like seller signatory. So I always say you can go ahead and get the listing agreement signed with whoever you're dealing with, but don't put it under contract to someone else until you really sort it out with the title company who they're going to require to sell. I put an investment property under contract once and we were like a week before closing and they were like, oh yeah, there's like 7 heirs we need to find that have to sign. And so they should have looked into that sooner. So then the deal died. So anyway, you know, then the property, and this is where you put the lot and block, you know, what subdivision it's in, what city it's in, count, and then this is where you put the address, like, you know, 6252 Klamath Road, Fort Worth, Texas 76116, right? So then B and C, this language right here says what the seller is selling and it mimics what's in the contract, right? So this is the time when you sit down with them, when you talk about B, C, and D, that you can address, like, here's what's going to go and here's what's going to stay. So if we have, like, you know, grandma's heirloom chandelier that they want to exclude, you're going to put that in there. My recommendation is that you remove it before you list it, because you don't want the buyer to be confused and think that they're going to get it. If there's something that's super meaningful to the seller to keep, I would just say, go ahead and take it down and let's put the replacement up and market it with the replacement, right? This happens mostly with bathroom mirrors, which sounds crazy, but the most fights I've heard of over all of my years of management is that the seller takes the bathroom mirrors because they were really expensive and they love them, and the buyer comes and they're like, these were not the mirrors that were in there, or there's nothing there. So usually there's no mirror. So just have those discussions like up front, and this is where you put that. Now, just because you put this in the listing agreement doesn't mean that that's what's in the contract, right? And just because you put it even in the MLS agreement doesn't mean that that's what's in the contract. You have to make sure that if something's being excluded, it makes it into the actual four corners of that 1 to 4 document in the exclusion section so that everyone's on the same page. Got it? Questions? Talking fast because this is a long document. Okay. So then this is where you check whether or not it's in a mandatory HOA. And, you know, there's some houses have like my house in the M Street is in a voluntary HOA. So I don't need, that's not in a mandatory one, but some subdivisions that were planned do have mandatory HOAs. And then of course, condominiums do and townhomes usually do. So you have this discussion here, is or is it not? And if it is, then you need to find out, find the subdivision information and ask the seller if they know. Some HOAs have like a right of first refusal, where like the other building owners get the right to purchase before it goes on the market. So there's a document, I'm gonna show it to you guys, that you can use with the HOA just to, let's see, I can't see it, but you guys can. So the request for information from an owners association. Typically the title company will request this for you, but if the seller doesn't know anything about it, it's not a bad idea to go ahead and request this now so that you have it all. It stays current. I think it has to be within 90 days. So if you put a property on the market right now, you can go ahead and request the owner's information so that when you're executing a contract, you can say, we've already delivered it to you, right? Because that's another out for a buyer, is the review of the HOA information. So if you put a property under contract and you wait for the HOA information and it finally comes, then the buyer has 3 days after they get it to terminate. So if you can deliver it to them up front before they even execute, you're removing that right for them to terminate. Does that make sense? Just a little bit of strategy. So if you're the seller, you do want to do that, but there's a cost, right? So the seller's going to have to pay there's usually a several $100 cost to getting the subdivision information. But I think strategically it's worth it to pay for this upfront so that you can deliver it, because you're removing that buyer's right to terminate. Like when an agent calls me in a panic because the options pass and the financing deadlines pass and they need a right to terminate, like the first question that I ask is it in an HOA, and have you received the documents yet? Because if you haven't, that's like an open-ended reason to get out. So if you want to protect your sellers, deliver that before you execute and make the buyer acknowledge. And in those, like in the addendum for HOA, there's a box where you can say like, we've accepted it, we've already seen it. So that just is a little, this is called request for information from an owners association. You send it to the HOA. And I mean, realistically, we work with such good title companies, you can ask the title company to do it for you. The only thing is that they're going to ask that like the seller pay for it. The title company's not going to pay for it for you, right? So, but this is another way to do it, is just fill it out with the seller and send it directly to the HOA. Then you have it. Any questions about that? That's a little bit of a deep dive, but it's kind of important. Okay. Yeah, you just have to be mindful. Okay, So the listing price, this is where you put the price, and of course it should be a dollar amount. In our listing process, we kind of say, after you have your appointment, you should go ahead and send them the document in DocuSign so that hopefully they just sign it. Or at least they have a chance to review it. You tell them that you're sending it for them to review, but maybe they're like, yeah, this was great, let's just sign it. And if you haven't priced the property yet, you can put TBD, like to be determined, and then do an amendment to the listing agreement where you say the price is this. So that's one way where you don't get stuck on executing the documents until you price it. So that's just one piece of information. I mean, this is my lawyer hat, like legally, if you don't have the price in a listing agreement, that's probably a material term and it's not like a valid agreement. But if you get to that point with the seller and they've changed their mind and they don't want to sell, it's not, we're gonna be like, we have this listing agreement that says TBD, right? We would let them out. So I encourage you to go ahead and get it signed with TBD, because mentally then they're committed to you. You can just do an amendment for the price. Does that make sense? Is that too like contracty? But so, okay. So then the listing begins on, today, hopefully. And then it ends on, I would say, at least get yourself a 6-month listing agreement, but as a matter of course, ask for a year at least. I mean, it's just too hard to know you can sell a property in 60 days or 90 days or 30 days. And there are sellers that will ask you to do that. And maybe in some circumstances it makes sense, but you guys worked so hard, and so much of the work that we do happens before the property ever even goes on the market. To only give yourself a 30-day runway then to get it under contract is really selling yourself short. So I would say at least 6 months, but say like our company policy is a year, and blame it on the broker, right? So this is when earned and pay. So this is about compensation. So when earned and payer, seller will pay broker, and then you fill out the amount, and these boxes should be checked also. And then if it's less than 6%, you would put in this administration fee. Right now, if you're getting 6%, we don't have that administration fee, but that's where that would be written in. Any questions there about when you guys are doing this? No? Okay. So one thing that we do see, like when we do get a contract back that's marked up, a lot of times this is the part that the seller will mark up, because it basically, obviously this is a realtor promoted form, so it's pretty protective of us, I would say, as realtors, our form. So it says that we've earned our commission when any of these things happen, and then it says when it's payable. And a lot of times sellers will say, no, you earned your commission once the deal closes, and that's fair. We don't usually argue if someone marks that up. So just to be mindful, if you get it back and it's marked up, like don't stress. If you ever do get a listing agreement back and it's marked up, send it to your manager or send it to me and we'll review it and walk through it. Most of the things that they're going to mark up is okay. There's a few things that relate to liability that we can't let them change for E&O purposes. So, this is just something for you guys to know, is that technically we're entitled to some of the fee if there's a buyer breach and the seller gets the earnest money. We rarely ask for any of it. We let the sellers keep it, but just so that you guys know, this section D1 entitles us to some of that. So if you worked crazy hard to fight to get that earnest money back and the seller wants to pay you or be grateful to you, like this is the provision that you actually have the right to that. So does that make sense? And then service providers, if brokers refer seller to a service provider, we may receive a fee for the referral. Then we say that referral fee is separate. And we would have, in that case, you would kind of disclose that affiliation. It's an affiliated business arrangement. So, and then any other fees are reimbursable expenses. And sometimes if the seller is going to pay for staging, agents will write that in here. Or, if it's a very hard seller who's like really negotiating you on prices and the seller's like, I'll pay for that, but I only going to pay you 5.5%, then you can just clarify that kind of here. So then this is an important one. Yeah.
Well, I know that some agents pay for this staging.
Yeah, which is
They
pretty
have to
standard.
provide-
Yes. And I mean, if you're getting 6%, that's part of what's included, right? Some sellers are
Yeah.
like, I don't want to pay. Some sellers are like, well, I only want to pay you 5. And you can say, okay, but what I would be doing with that additional percentage is staging your home and doing a video and all these things that I don't, that's my marketing budget, right? So yeah, yeah. So, okay, protection period. So what this is an important one for you guys to know, is I usually say 90 days. Some people may say longer, some people may say shorter. I always just put 90, and it basically protects you so that buyers that you were the procuring cause for in your listing, you can give the seller a list within 10 days after the listing ends saying, these are the people that came to the property, and if they end up buying it in this 90-day period, I still can earn my commission. So like if you were working on a big deal and the seller's like, oh, I'm just tired of listing this, I'm over it. But the last week, of course, inevitably it'll show 3 times and someone's really interested. You can give the seller those 3 people's names. And if they do a deal within the next 90 days, you'll be involved and you'll get your commission. So yeah, it doesn't, I mean, it just says, broker may send seller written notice specifying the names. So in the contract, there's going to be a notice provision, like in every contract, there's a notice section that says how to give legal notice. Go ahead, Melissa.
I'm sorry.
Oh, no worries.
I'm good.
Okay. So you just have to follow that provision. So then, one thing to note, guys, is that if this paragraph doesn't apply, and this is a really important one, if they relist it with another broker and they have to pay the broker fee. So I'll tell the story. I had a client once, and he had a little townhome on Casablanca in Fort Worth, and I helped him list it and property managed it, list it for lease and property managed it for like 3 years. Cause I was like, I know one day he's going to sell, because he was always like, should I sell it or should I lease it? Should I sell it or should I lease it? So finally he was like, okay, I'm going to sell it. And we had 2 really bad buyers that just through like weird freaks of nature circumstances both flaked. And he was like, oh, I'm tired of this. I don't want to do this anymore. I was like, okay, fine. So we terminated the listing, and there was 2 people that were like really circling, and I was like, I think these people are really interested. And he was like, no, it's not going to happen. And one of the people that brought the buyer had a partner in her brokerage get a listing agreement from him, and they listed it, and the other agent listed it. That person that brought the buyer bought it, and so then that brokerage got all of the commission, even though the buyer saw it under my listing. So if it gets the moral of the story is that was just a yucky, like painful deal, and we're going to have those, and it stinks. It's part of it. Not always. Some of them are great, right? But if it gets relisted with another broker, like your protection period really doesn't mean anything. So kind of a bummer. But so then county, all amounts payable to broker are paid in cash. I always just put the county that the property's in, or you can put whatever county your office is in. I mean, we can close in any county. So and then we're saying the seller authorizes the escrow agent to kind of collect and disperse the funds. Okay, so now paragraph 6. This is an important one, especially in light of clear cooperation. So this is, with our special new clear cooperation rules, we have even the seller is bound to comply and is not supposed to be publicly marketing their property if it's an office exclusive. So this notice is basically clarifying to the seller that if the property is publicly marketed, meaning even if the seller does it, if the agent does it, anything, MLS rules require that the broker file the listing with the MLS within 1 business day, and then explains what public marketing is. So this is where sections A and 1 and 2 explain like what type of listing are we going to do. So if you check A1, then this is going to be an MLS listing, right? If you check A2, then this is a hip pocket office exclusive, and it reiterates again what the rules are, and that if clear cooperation is violated, then it has to go in the MLS. So when the seller signs the listing agreement, they are on notice of all of the rules of clear cooperation because of this paragraph 6. Okay. So back to paragraph. If you're going to do a traditional like MLS listing, then you're checking this box that we're going to file it with the MLS. And then the rule is that as soon as the listing agreement signed, it has to be filed within 5 days. Or usually what happens is our agents, you check this 1B box, and you say, you might give yourself 30 days or 15 days or whatever, and say, photography, staging, whatever, give you some time to get the property ready. So that's one way to do it if you know you're going to be kind of get it listed. And that's when agents say, I have this coming soon. I have this off, it's exclusive. It's not in the MLS yet. But if you guys are telling each other about it, it's because you've checked A, 1B. Or the other thing you can do is you can make it an office exclusive for as long as you need, and then do an amendment and make it an MLS listing when you're ready to go active in the MLS. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
How that works? Good. Okay. Is this confusing? Is this helping?
It's
How-
helping.
Okay. Okay, good. So then this next is, listing content. And if the broker does an MLS listing, here's what's going to happen. And it's going to say, sellers giving the broker the right to publish all of this information that the seller may share. Anything that the broker comes up with is the broker's content. Seller has no right to it. If you take amazing photos, those are not the seller's photos, those are your photos. And then the seller's just acknowledging again that all of this content is going to be filed in the MLS, publicly displayed, et cetera, et cetera. So any questions about that? It's just talking about kind of who owns whatever's generated and where it can go. Okay. So then access to the property, and this is a discussion you need to have with your seller too. Typically we do key boxes or we do agent to meet depending on the price point. And even when we do agent to meet, we usually put a key box on the property, maybe so that it's just there. So this is where the seller is giving the broker permission to do that. And then here, if you're going to work with showing time, this is when you say, we're going to use showing time, and you can explain to your sellers like how showing time works. And this is where, because we put key boxes, we put basically access to their house, like swinging off the front door of the house, we get permission from the seller to do that, right? They are authorized or are not. And then if there's a tenant, then seller will furnish broker a written statement signed by all tenants authorizing the use of a key box. There is a form for that. So if you have a property with a tenant in it, you need to make sure to get the tenant's permission to protect us and to protect your seller. And there's a form for that to help your seller out. So this is the provision that we often see marked up by lawyers also. It's just the liability provision. And this is one where if you get a markup back from a client and this is marked up, we generally can say we agree to all your other changes. We just can't agree to this one for E&O purposes because it's changing the rules about liability. So, and obviously we're walking into people's homes and we're bringing strangers into people's homes and there's potential for danger, and it's who's responsible for what and is there negligence, and so you just have to be really careful and make sure that this paragraph kind of stays in place. Does anyone have questions about any of that? No? We're flying through here because we got a lot to get through. Okay, so this is, and I'm gonna have to defer to Jessica on this one because I don't want to misspeak about what our company policy is. But this is where we're gonna say, Briggs Freeman and its agents are gonna show, and that's, and that is an intermediary deal, but we also want it to work. We want to work with other brokers, right? So broker will allow other brokers to show the property and we'll pay them a fee. So then we say, if they're MLS participants, we usually pay 3%. And some people put 2%, some people put 3% here. I'm sorry, I don't know the answer. We'll have to ask Jessica what we recommend that we do. For non-MLS brokers, some people say less, right? 2%, because if we have a agent that lives, if the buyer's mom is an agent in Houston and she's not a member of our MLS, she's not going to have key box access. It's going to be a little bit more difficult. So a lot of times you end up doing more work because you have to go over there for every showing. And so some people say we only pay our non-MLS brokers too. It's really up to you as the agent, but it's a good to have that discussion and think about. And I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that. But you can also just put always 3% and say, we're going to pay this much. Now you may be in a situation, if you take a huge listing and you're the seller's only going to pay 5% because it's a $10 million listing, you may say, well, I'm going to take 2.5 and try to get the other buyer to take 2.5, the buyer's broker. But as a general rule of thumb at Briggs Freeman, we pay our buyer's agents 3%. We had an agent who used to take a 4% listing and then offer 1% to buyers agents. And we're like, we don't do that here, right? We pay our buyers brokers 3%, generally speaking. So any questions about that? Okay. All right. So this is an important one because when we do an intermediary deal, which basically intermediary means that the agent represents both sides and Briggs Freeman's the only broker involved, or it means that there's a Briggs Freeman agent representing the buyer and a Briggs Freeman agent representing the seller. That's called intermediary with appointment, where one agent is appointed to the buyer and one agent is appointed to the seller. So you're going to check this box because the seller is going to want the property to be shown to every buyer, right? Not just Briggs Freeman buyers. So usually, I mean, it would be very rare for this box not to be checked where the seller does acknowledge like they want an intermediary, they're open to an intermediary situation, or then this is the box that you check where they would say, we don't want Briggs, we're not open to intermediary, meaning we don't want, we always want a different broker on the other side. So that's very rarely checked, right? But we need the sellers to check this box because that's the first half of the 2 requirements for intermediary situation. So in an intermediary situation, if Kathy has a listing, her new listing, and Jasmine brings the buyer, then in the listing agreement, Kathy's sellers need to have checked this. And in the buyer's rep agreement, Jasmine's buyers need to have checked that they are also open-minded to the intermediary. That's the first place where the buyer and the seller acknowledge that they're open-minded to intermediary. Then the second place is the document, the intermediary notice that goes into the contract that both parties acknowledge. We've already done this in our representation agreements, but we're agreeing again here that we're cool with intermediary. And you need both of those to properly do an intermediary, which is like a high liability situation. So make sure you're covered twice then, because you got it in their representation agreement here or in their buyer's rep, and then you got it again in the contract on that intermediary notice. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. And then this is an explanation about under intermediary, like what are our duties, right? We can't disclose what we can disclose, what we can't disclose. So you should be familiar with those. This is just a kind of a boilerplate statement about confidential information, unless the seller authorizes you to share confidential information. And that's an important one. So when you guys get, like, the terms of an offer are not confidential, right? So if Kathy has a listing and she gets 3 different offers, with the seller's permission, she can tell every buyer what the other offers are. But the seller has to give you permission. The buyer has no right to like privacy or for that information not to be shared. So that's an important thing for you guys to understand, is that as long as the seller gives you permission, you can share anything that they've told you.
How do you get the agent to tell you?
Get the
listing agent to tell you?
She's asking if you're in, I would say, like, what can you share with me? How many other offers are there? What are their prices? I would specifically ask. And if they are like, oh, I can't share that, you can be like, well, if the seller gives you permission and you share the same information with everyone, you actually can share it. So yeah, well, sometimes strategically it's better for them not to. So the seller doesn't want, if I have 2 offers and one is like an FHA terrible offer and one is cash, I'm not going to tell the cash person that that's a terrible offer. I'm going to say, I'm not going to tell you, right? But then the same is true for the FHA. You can't say we have this amazing cash offer, because that's unfair, right? That's the duty when you have multiple offers, is to treat everyone like equally. Yeah. Okay. So this is where they're authorizing us to put the property out there, right? So we're going to say these boxes usually are not going to be checked because we're really giving our property the best exposure. But sometimes the seller may not want it put out there for privacy reasons, or they may not want the address put out there, which is, we can't really put it in the MLS without an address. So you just have to have that discussion with them, just to be aware that this is where, by not checking those boxes, the seller's giving us the authority to push it out there. And then this is where, this is for part of the MLS, is like, how are we going to market this financing wise? And this is where you need to know the condition of the property somewhat, right? Because typically speaking, it's conventional cash, you know, other. If the seller's interested in owner financing, you could check that box. That would be rare, but possibly. And then at the low, it's usually at the lower price points, not necessarily, but the property itself has to qualify through a little bit more stringent requirements when they're VA or FHA loans. So like you may have a $200,000 listing that's not in very good shape and you don't think it'll qualify for FHA if it needs a new roof and the windows are painted shut and it's just not in good shape and it's not going to pass an FHA inspection, you may not market it for FHA. But generally speaking, a property could be marketed for all of those. The higher end homes you don't usually see with VA and FHA check just because those are generally for lower priced homes, I would say. Not like super low, but not luxury homes. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So now it's saying what, in accordance with MLS rules, we're going to do all of these things: advertise the properties, place a for sale sign, give market information. Speaking of which, in this crazy market, just as a pro tip, I had an agent tell me she was doing this the other day and I was so proud, where when she's representing her buyers and everyone's like overpaying right now and waiving appraisal, and she gives them a copy of the comps, her buyers, and she has them initial it just to say, like, we had the discussion that you're paying like above what the comps show and that you're okay with it. So that's a good tip for your buyers right now, is just to protect yourself and to make sure you're having that conversation. Sidebar. Anyway, so these are kind of all of the things that you're entitled to do to market the property, but obviously it's saying you're not authorized to execute any document, and do not do it, guys. Do not, if you miss an initial and the seller says, oh, just initial it for me, just don't do it, right? If it's just an initial, you can probably do it at the closing table or put it in DocuSign, but please, please, please don't ever sign anything on behalf of your clients. So now these are representations that the seller is making, that they own the property, that they don't have it listed with someone else, that any pool or spa complies with all applicable laws. Sometimes the really diligent people cross that out because they're like, I'm not sure, which is fine. That no one else has a right of first refusal. These are the sellers making these representations to us as a broker to protect us, right? It asks that they're current on their loan. So that's always a bad surprise if you're listing a property and then you find out the seller is like in pre-foreclosure or very far behind. So they're making this representation here that they're in good standing. And then, you know, that the information they're providing is true, if they're using a relocation company. And then these are just additional promises. Again, this is our form, right? We realtors drafted it, so we're putting a lot of burden on the sellers. The form is very favorable to us. But these are the things that the seller is agreeing to do, is you know, cooperate with the showings, not rent or lease it without prior listing approval. Every once in a while, we'll see B and C crossed out and we're like, what is their end game? Like, do they want to make a deal without us while we have it listed? So I always say, if you see those crossed out, like, have a conversation with their seller, or just at least be aware, like, does the seller not want to agree that they shouldn't be negotiating with other prospects, right? Which is something to think about. They're going to keep the pool and everything maintained, et cetera, et cetera. So provide copies of leases. That's a good thing when you're signing the listing agreement, to say, if there's a tenant in place, say, please get me a lease. And if they have, we heard Chris talking the other day, if they have oil and gas leases and they have a copy of it, which would be amazing, have them deliver those. So those are just the seller's promises. And then this is another paragraph that we can't really have the sellers manipulate for E&O purposes. But this is kind of just a disclaimer on our side, that if it becomes vacant, they need to notify their insurance company. This kind of protects us, right? And then this is a disclaimer saying we're not responsible for these things that happen during the course of the listing, right? Acts of God, third parties, dangerous conditions, seller being negligent, you know, other things that other brokers do. If someone else shows your listing and they knock over, you know, grandma's precious vase, like, we're protected under this paragraph, right? And again, if there's something like that, remove it before you list it so that doesn't happen. So then this is an indemnification where the seller is agreeing to indemnify us if they act kind of negligently or they fail to do something that they're supposed to do. So that protects us. And then the rest of this is just kind of boilerplate. This is what happens in the event of default. There is a mediation provision. Governs attorney's fees and you know, who would get them in the event of a lawsuit. And then this is where we check all of the other addendum that are going to be part of our listing. So seller's disclosure should be checked. Lead-based paint if it was before 1978, the T47 if they have an existing survey. And also, you guys, we always say like it's our best practice to get the T47 signed and notarized and get a copy of the survey and keep it with the seller's disclosure so that you're not waiting to get the T47 until after it's due, because if you are, then you might be buying the buyer a new survey. So always get the T47 and the survey signed up front. If there's one of these water code notices, the information from owners association. You can request mortgage information. That doesn't happen very often, but these are all promulgated forms. So this is a nice little reminder of things that you might need, right? Mineral clauses, on-site sewer, property insurance, special, if you use any of these documents. The condominium addendum if it's a condo, the key box authorization if there's a tenant, and then seller's authorization to release and advertise certain information. That's a form where if the seller is like, look, I want to do a seller's listing bonus or whatever of $5,000 if it's executed before whatever, or if the seller says, yeah, I want you to go ahead and tell everyone that if there's just some information that you want to document specially that the seller has said it's okay to share, there's this form that you can use for that purpose to say, if you think it's a little bit out there for the seller to ask you to share this information, you can have them sign this form that's very clear about what you're offering to do. Okay, so these are just kind of catch-all boilerplate. This is our entire agreement. It can't be assigned. It's binding. All the sellers are joint and severally liable. Texas is the governing law. If there's any term in this contract that doesn't make sense, then we would remove that, but the rest of the contract is still valid. And then here's your notice section. Notices between the parties must be in writing and are effective when sent to the receiving party's address, fax, or email described in paragraph 1. So if you put their email in paragraph 1 and you send them something via email like that protection period list, then you're covered based on this notice provision. Okay, so then here's just some more CYA for us as brokers, just additional disclosures to tell the seller, you know, remove your jewelry, review the information. I encourage you guys when it does get listed to send a copy of the listing to the seller so that they can look at it also to make sure that it's correct. The last thing that you want to do is for the property to be listed for 2 weeks and then a seller to call and be like, you're missing a fireplace or something's not right. So just once it gets listed, you should be really proud because you did a good job with the listing and you have awesome photos. Send them an email and say the listing is live. Like, I think it looks great. Please review it and make sure that you think it looks great too. So this is where, if this is this section I here, if the seller is not a US citizen or is a foreign corporation, you might have to have a FIRPTA sign and then taxes need to be withheld at title. So something to just be mindful of. I'm not going to go too deep into that. There's whole like classes on the FIRPTA, which is the foreign person's affidavit that gets signed at closing and money needs to be withheld. So just be aware that if that you need to check that out. And if you're not sure what it is, but you're like, this person might be, talk to your title company, right? Okay. So this is our catch-all with all the wire fraud that's rampant these days, saying, you know, don't be careful about how you communicate that information. And then again, our last one, most important, is that we can't give legal advice. So read it carefully. If you don't understand, get an attorney, right? And then this is where we sign it. And you're going to check this box and write broker associate's signature as an authorized agent, and then your name. So Briggs Freeman, check this box, and then your name and your signature. So that's it. That was a lot. That was the very, very quick and dirty on a long, complicated document. But this document is very friendly to us because it's ours, right? So questions. That was a lot.
I have a question, Zerine. What if there's no survey?
So if there's no survey, that's fine. Just in the contract, you have to determine who's going to get a survey. Is it the buyer or is it the seller? And I mean,
Who typically pays for it?
that's a good question, and probably someone who does these deals more. I mean, I always recommend if you have to get a new survey, go ahead and have the buyer pay for it, because then the buyer has, it's called privity of contract, meaning they directly engage the surveyor. So if there is a title issue down the line and there was a mistake on the survey, the buyer actually engaged the surveyor to prepare it, so they have a cause of action against them, right? Arguably, if the seller pays for the survey, then the seller engaged them, and the surveyor could argue like, I have no responsibility to you. I haven't like litigated that, so I don't know if that's how it actually works, but it's a good argument to either side to just say the buyer should pay for it.
Okay.
You know,
Okay.
and I mean, I always say, I think the buyer should get a new survey, unless the survey is pretty much brand new. I think it's a good idea for the buyer to get a new survey for that purpose. And because it makes their title policy that much stronger, right? If you have a current survey with a surveyor that you know, I just think it's a good idea, especially when you're dealing with higher priced homes. Like, it's just, you should know what you're buying, and a current survey is going to show you,
Right.
right?
Great. This has been great information.
Oh, hold on. Go ahead, Kathy.
I had a situation where when I had the contract come in, the buyer was paying for the title insurance and the closing costs.
Yeah.
Of course,
We see that now. It's kind of 6 in one, half dozen in the other, because it's one less cost that the seller has to pay. But I mean, if you had $1 million offer and the buyers says, well, I'll pay for the title policy, and you had a $1,050,000, and this they say the seller wants to pay it, even if it's the cost of the title policy, right? It's 6 in one, half dozen in the other. And you can Google like Texas title insurance premium calculator and put in any price point. It's going to tell you what's the cost of the policy. So it's just a calculation. If you just Google Texas title premium insurance calculator, and then, you know, like, we can offer to pay, let's see, most title companies have this on their website. So if you just Google calculator, anyone's going to work. When I was a lawyer, I used to like painstakingly do the calculation because I was anal retentive, right? But you don't have to do that. So there, the premium for an owner's policy on $1 million deal is $5,000. And if you get that additional survey coverage, that's an option. It looks like it would be $6,132. So that's what we always say when we're talking about that survey coverage. That's optional now in the contract. It's 5% of the premium. So now you can figure out what the premium is and say, on $1 million deal, 5% of 5,575. I don't do my math in my head, but then you can kind of figure it out. Say we're asking for another. Here's good at math, not me. I know. I'm like, so it's $278. So that's not expensive.
That's
right?
not bad.
No, on $1 million deal to get that additional coverage, it's about $300. I think it's totally worth it. It's just it makes the policy that much stronger, right? Okay, so that was a little bit of a deviation, but that's all I got. Who has questions, thoughts, concerns, sarcastic remarks? Nothing. Okay. All right. Well, we'll do next time we meet, and I think it'll be 2 weeks. I'll have to double check the calendar, but I'll of course send you guys an email and a calendar invite and all that good stuff, and gently nag you to join us. But we'll have an experienced agent joining us, and I'll try to maybe find someone who can go through the IABS with us. How are you guys feeling in the summer? Are we good with this pace? At least I think twice a month is good.
Yes.
Reason for us to check in and see what's going on. Okay.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for joining. I appreciate you. We're going to go get started on our ninja here now in Turtle Creek. So bye guys. Thanks.
Bye. Thank you.